Drika, how would you describe Cassie's demeanor when she took the stand today?
When she walked in there, Rachel, she had on a brown dress, form-fitting, visibly pregnant, head held high, and did not make any eye contact.
The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation as the text messages between Sean, Diddy Combs, and Cassie Ventura were presented. Raw, unvarnished glimpses into the fractured reality of their 11-year relationship. These weren't just words on a phone screen, they were evidence of an emotional tug-of-war that had unraveled behind the glittering facade of a high-profile celebrity romance. From the outside, they had been the picture of success and glamour. Red carpets, paparazzi flashes, and a life few could dream of. But beneath the surface, something far darker was brewing.
You know, attorneys say that this is the first time that they've met since 2018 when she attended the funeral for Kim Porter, which is the mother of Sean Combs' 3 children. So to watch Sean Combs watching her was really interesting because they haven't seen each other in at least 6 years. But he can't say anything. You know, this is a moment for him where he has to be silent. And right now we're hearing what she says in terms of what happened during the course of their over 10-year relationship.
So it started with a single line from Diddy, a plea that seemed almost desperate. Can I not get a chance to make things right? The context was heartbreakingly clear. This wasn't the first time Cassie had tried to leave, and it wouldn't be the last. Her response cut through the courtroom like a razor's edge. You took care of me materialistically, not where I needed it. I needed you to love me. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years of neglect, manipulation, and emotional starvation. They weren't just messages, they were a cry for help from someone who had been drowning in a sea of luxury, unable to find the shore. But Diddy's version of love, as these texts revealed, was transactional at best. He saw his wealth and influence as the ultimate proof of his care, a warped currency he thought could buy forgiveness, loyalty, and silence. And when that wasn't enough, he resorted to something far more sinister: control. The messages painted a picture of a man who couldn't bear to lose, not just Cassie's companionship, but the power he held over her. It was power wrapped in designer labels and 5-star vacations, but power nonetheless. And Cassie, as the texts showed, was beginning to see through it.
Is he showing any reaction to what she is saying on the stand?
I can tell you that immediately, the moment she opened her mouth, you could see that Combs was listening intently to everything that she has to say, as well as those jurors. People know that she was that star witness, the key person in all of this. When you think about that civil suit that came out in 2023, that was settled the day after, she really is the person that connects all the dots.
And one exchange from 2016 stood out. It was days after an incident that had left her physically and emotionally shaken. Yet here she was, trying to communicate her pain in words that felt both defiant and defeated. When you get messed up the wrong way, she wrote, you always want to show me that you have the power and you knock me around. The message was a window into the cycle she had been caught in, a cycle of harm, apology, and harm again. Diddy's response? Silence. It was deafening in its intent, a refusal to acknowledge the damage he had done and a chilling reminder of who held the upper hand. But the texts didn't just reveal Diddy's need for control. They also exposed Cassie's internal struggle. There were moments when she seemed to acquiesce, moments when her words hinted at complicity. In one exchange, she appeared to initiate plans for one of the infamous gatherings that had now become central to the trial's narrative. Wish we could FO'd before you left, she wrote in 2013, using a shorthand that had been dissected endlessly in court. Defense attorneys seized on these moments, presenting them as proof that Cassie had been a willing participant, someone who knew exactly what she was signing up for. But the prosecution pushed back, arguing that these texts were the words of someone trying to survive, someone who had learned to play along to avoid the consequences of saying no.
And again, just to reiterate what is a freak-off, the freak-off essentially was something that Cassie said she learned about through Sean Combs about a year into their relationship. He described it as voyeurism, wanting to watch her have sex with someone else. And she said that she did it because she was 22, 21, she was young, she didn't know any better, and that she wanted to please Sean Combs.
The deeper you looked into the messages, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a relationship gone wrong, it was a battlefield. Cassie's texts showed a woman trying to navigate an emotional minefield where every step could trigger a reaction. She wanted more, and she wasn't afraid to say it, even if the price was another argument, another confrontation. I needed you to love me, she had written, but the unspoken part of that message was louder, and you never did. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of these exchanges was the glimpses they gave into Cassie's breaking point. By 2018, the year their relationship finally ended, her messages were laced with a quiet desperation. She was no longer asking for love or understanding. She was asking for freedom. "I can't do this anymore," she wrote in one of her final texts to Diddy. It was a simple sentence, but it carried the weight of years of pain, frustration, and fear. And yet, even as she tried to walk away, Diddy's messages followed her, like the shadow she couldn't outrun. "You know you'll never find someone like me," he wrote. It wasn't a statement of love, it was a warning. And then there was the elephant in the room, the recordings. Cassie had testified that she lived in constant fear of what Diddy might do with them, how he might use them to destroy her reputation or silence her forever. The texts hinted at this fear but never stated it outright, a chilling reminder of the unspoken threats that loomed over their relationship. It was control in its purest, most terrifying form, and it was all laid bare for the jury to see.
At some point in time, she actually had said that she looked forward to the freak-offs. Why did Cassie express looking forward to these said freak-offs?
When the prosecution asked her, was there ever a time that you enjoyed the freak-offs? This is when Cassie got choked up and she said, "I did, but only because I got to spend one-on-one time with Combs, and I really did love him."
As the courtroom absorbed these messages, the tension was palpable. This wasn't just about Diddy and Cassie anymore. It was about something much bigger. It was about power and what people are willing to do to keep it. It was about the fine line between love and control and how easily it can be crossed. And most of all, it was about the secrets we keep and the lies we tell ourselves to survive. But if these texts were the tip of the iceberg, what lay beneath the surface was even darker, even more twisted. This wasn't just a story about a toxic relationship. It was a glimpse into a world of influence and manipulation that went far beyond two people. And as the trial continued, it became clear that the worst was yet to come.
And that is speaking to the psychological abuse, in addition to the physical abuse that she potentially experienced as
Yeah,
well.
she's definitely laying out someone who was young, who was influenced by wanting to have this record career. She signed a 10-album deal with Bad Boy Entertainment, led by Sean Combs, and basically describes being enamored by Sean Combs.
It wasn't just Cassie who had stories to share, though hers were the most vivid, the most haunting. As her testimony ripped through the courtroom, it was as if a floodgate had been opened. Suddenly, a pattern began to emerge, a web of allegations, all pointing back to Sean Combs and the empire he had built, brick by brick, on a foundation of charm, wealth, and unchecked control. Because this wasn't just about one toxic relationship. No, this was about a system so intricately designed, so protected by money, influence, and fear, that it functioned like a well-oiled machine for years, if not decades. The prosecution wasted no time in pulling back the curtain on what they described as Combs' network. It wasn't just his personal assistants or security team, though they played their roles. It was more insidious than that. There were whispers of employees who knew too much, publicists who cleaned up his messes, and even industry insiders who turned a blind eye to behavior that, in hindsight, was nothing short of calculated. The picture they painted was of a man who didn't just indulge in excess, but orchestrated it, using the people around him as pawns in a much larger game.
What I thought was also interesting is she said that after that first freak-off, she said she felt dirty. She didn't want to do it. And when she brought up the idea of having a conversation about the freak-offs in an email, which the jurors saw, she said she backpedaled in the email because Combs responded by saying, "I know, you don't want to do it." And she said, "Oh no, well, it's not that." But that was the beginning. That was in
One witness, a former bodyguard, described how he had been ordered to escort women, sometimes strangers, sometimes individuals Combs already knew, to undisclosed locations for what he referred to as meetings. And these meetings, as it turned out, were anything but professional. The bodyguard recalled being handed envelopes of cash, no questions asked, and told to ensure that no one followed. He admitted he didn't always know what happened behind closed doors, but the aftermath was often telling. Women would leave in tears or silence, their expressions drained, as if they had been through something they couldn't quite process. But it was the testimony of another former insider, someone who had worked closely with Combs during his rise to fame, that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. This individual detailed how Combs allegedly used his recording studio and other properties as staging grounds for his behavior. These weren't just creative spaces, they claimed. They were environments meticulously controlled to ensure his privacy. Security cameras were everywhere, but the footage didn't go to just anyone. It was reportedly reviewed by a select few, and anything incriminating was erased immediately.
Jurors heard testimony from a key prosecution witness in Sean Diddy Combs' federal trial in New York City Tuesday. His ex-girlfriend and singer Cassie Ventura spoke about her 10-year relationship with Combs and the psychological, physical, and abuse she says she endured. Ventura first leveled accusations against Combs in a 2023 lawsuit, which was settled a day later. Dozens of men and women have filed suits against him since 2020.
And this need for control extended far beyond his professional life. Prosecutors argued that Combs had created a culture where loyalty was demanded, silence was enforced, and dissent was punished. One former employee described working in a climate of fear where even minor mistakes could result in verbal abuse or worse. Another testified that staff were often given ND to sign before they could even begin working, effectively muzzling them from ever speaking out. He didn't just want employees, the employee said. He wanted soldiers. People who would do what they were told, no matter how outrageous it seemed. The trial also brought forward more accounts from women who claimed they had been caught in the same web of manipulation and power. One woman who had met Combs through a mutual friend during his peak fame described how she was lured into his world with promises of career opportunities and connections. She alleged that what began as casual meetings quickly turned into calculated efforts to isolate her from her friends and family. The prosecution highlighted how Combs' tactics often followed a chillingly similar pattern: charm, gifts, and attention, followed by control, degradation, and fear. Her story, prosecutors argued, was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger framework of exploitation.
Yeah, that's right. Cassandra Ventura, also known as Cassie, walked in with her head held high and did not make eye contact with Sean Combs. But she did describe a relationship that lasted over 10 years with Combs, in which she says he was the one in control.
Another accuser recounted how she had been invited to one of Combs' infamous private gatherings, an event she thought would be a glamorous networking opportunity. Instead, she described a suffocating atmosphere where women were pressured to participate in activities they were uncomfortable with, all under the watchful eyes of Combs and his entourage. She claimed that leaving wasn't an option, doors were locked, and anyone who expressed hesitation was belittled or ostracized. The prosecution pointed out that this was another instance where Combs' wealth and influence created an environment where people felt powerless to speak out or resist. Perhaps most disturbing were the accounts of how Combs allegedly used surveillance and recordings as tools of control. Several victims claimed they were filmed without their knowledge during vulnerable moments, only to later discover that these recordings were being used as leverage to ensure their silence. Prosecutors presented evidence suggesting that this practice was not only deliberate but systematic, with a team of individuals allegedly tasked with managing and securing these materials. It wasn't just about intimidation. It was about constructing a safety net that ensured Combs' dominance went unchallenged for years.
A window into Cassie's side of the story. There's a video that people may have seen. It was aired by CNN years ago. It's become a video at the heart of this case. That's security footage from the Intercontinental Hotel in 2016, where there appears to be Sean Combs assaulting Cassie Ventura. You see him.
These stories also revealed the psychological toll inflicted upon the victims. Many described how the experience left them struggling with long-term trauma, including anxiety, depression, and an overwhelming sense of shame. One woman shared how she had been unable to pursue her career after her encounter with Combs, fearing that speaking out would lead to retaliation. Another revealed that she had spent years in therapy trying to rebuild her self-worth after being subjected to what prosecutors called a cycle of dehumanization. These accounts underscored the far-reaching impact of Combs' actions, not just on the individuals involved, but on their families, careers, and lives. What tied all these accounts together was the recurring theme of fear. Fear of speaking out, fear of being discredited, and fear of the power Combs wielded, even outside the courtroom. The prosecution emphasized that this wasn't just about one man's behavior, but about an entire system that enabled it. Combs' ability to silence and control his accusers was, they argued, a testament to how wealth and influence could be weaponized to protect the powerful while leaving victims voiceless. These stories, woven together, painted a chilling portrait of a man who understood exactly how far his reach extended and wasn't afraid to use it.
Talking about her experience in that video, how she had a big movie premiere that was coming up, and what had happened was they were engaged in a freak-off that she didn't really want to be a part of, and Combs had punched her. She knew she had a black eye. She felt she had to get out of there, so she waited for a moment when he was occupied. She said he may have been on the phone, in the shower.
And some of it was outrageous. The prosecution presented evidence suggesting that Combs had gone to extreme lengths to protect his image. One particularly damning piece of testimony came from a public relations specialist who described being asked to bury stories on multiple occasions. They claimed Combs had offered financial incentives to certain outlets to ensure that unfavorable headlines never saw the light of day. And if that didn't work, there were other methods. veiled threats, legal action, and, in some cases, outright intimidation. But if Combs' network was built to protect him, it also became his Achilles heel. The trial revealed that some of his closest confidants had turned against him, either out of guilt, frustration, or a desire to distance themselves from the fallout. It was these individuals who provided much of the evidence that had led to his arrest in the first place. Emails, text messages, and recorded conversations that prosecutors described as a roadmap to his alleged crimes. One former associate even claimed that Combs had once bragged about how untouchable he was, laughing off the idea that anyone could ever hold him accountable.
We're really starting to get more of Cassie's side of this story, and a very striking moment in court, too, was that she broke down crying earlier during her testimony. Jerika talked about how she talked about doing these freak-offs because she wanted one-on-one time.
But invincibility has its limits, and as the trial progressed, the cracks in Combs' empire became impossible to ignore. The defense, of course, tried to paint a different picture. They argued that their client was a flawed but ultimately harmless individual, someone who had made mistakes but didn't deserve to have his entire life dismantled in the public eye. They pointed to his philanthropy, his contributions to music, and his role as a father, arguing that these aspects of his character had been unfairly overshadowed by the accusations. But for many in the courtroom, these arguments rang hollow. The evidence was too overwhelming, the stories too consistent, the pain too palpable. And then there was the money. While Combs had settled some civil cases in the past, the sums involved were staggering. The prosecution argued that these payouts weren't acts of generosity or remorse, they were hush money, plain and simple. They pointed to records showing large transfers to individuals shortly after incidents were reported, arguing that this was part of a larger strategy to silence his accusers.
Listen to everybody, but you believe all proof.
Believe the facts.
This video is proof.
Hands down proof.
But quiet was the last thing he was getting now. The trial had become a media circus, with every new revelation splashed across headlines and dissected on social media. Fans and critics alike were divided, with some defending him as a victim of opportunism and others calling for his immediate incarceration. And through it all, Combs remained stoic. His expression unreadable as witness after witness took the stand to recount stories that painted him as a man who had used his power not just to build an empire, but to shield himself from accountability. And that's where we're left. A man once celebrated as a king of the music industry, now fighting for his freedom as the world watches. But what do you think? Is this the fall of a tyrant or the persecution of a flawed icon? Let us know your thoughts down below, and trust us, this story isn't over yet. Stay tuned.